Hello and welcome to another episode of Talking TRM, the podcast dedicated to travel risk management. My name is Bex Deadman, also known as Travel Risk Bex, and it's my pleasure to invite a guest who is a very new friend because he's definitely been a friend since I've got into the TRM side, but has become a really nice and close confidant in this space. So I've been trying to get him on the podcast for quite some time. We actually met doing another podcast on travel risk management. What else would we be talking about? And since then, I've been to a couple of events together, and he partnered in our event earlier this year, the Travel Optimization Management Summit, as part of the Travel Risk Academy. So yeah, we're working really closely with them, which is great. So without further ado, if I could ask you, my guest, who are you and what do you do?
Hi there, and thanks for that intro, Bex. And yeah, it was good to meet you on the podcast. Again, TRM related, and as we're doing today. So I'm Shaun Boulter. I'm Global Head of Security and Operations for Corporate Mobility within AXA Partners. AXA Partners is just a very small entity within the whole of the AXA Group, but we're quite an important small entity within that big group because we're the assistance arm of ultimately the insurance products that are sold globally. We're the ones that provide the medical assistance, the security assistance, the roadside assistance, and other related products associated with that. And also as well travel insurance, and that we're the travel insurance underwriter and that for our travel insurance products. As I say, my role ultimately is to ensure that we have the correct operational capabilities to support our corporate clients, our B2B clients, and within AXA Partners, we're the only B2B product that we're selling. The rest is all B2B2C and so on, or B2C. And as I say, we're predominantly responsible for that corporates as they travel on their business related ventures around the world. And that, so I say my role is to ensure that one, we have the correct operational capabilities, the correct network globally to support our clients in their time of need, making sure we give them a robust travel risk management tool and platform so they can make correct judgments even before setting outside of the office and booking their travel plans, and then supporting them, tracking and monitoring them during their travels, and then also then supporting them should they need any requirement, either it be advice or actual physical assistance, and that to support them in their time of need. And sometimes that assistance is just literally verbal, a little recommendation as what they should or shouldn't do. Sometimes it's physical, as I say, we have to move them internally within a country. Sometimes, again, even externally from that or that country to a safe haven, and then even sometimes as well, and that repatriation back home. And on the medical side of it, and that can be, and that anything from advices to medications and that directions to a pharmacy, a little bit more serious, administered into a hospital, making sure they're in the correct facility, getting the correct treatment, and then if not, and that then assisting with the movement and that from that medical facility to a better one to ensure they get the correct treatment, and then worst case, should somebody and that die, and that we then deal in also the repatriation of mortal remains, making sure that the loved ones get back home.
Thank you, Sean, for that fantastically in-depth kind of overview actually of what your, as you say, very small but yet very important part of what AXA does. I think when anyone listening to this thinks AXA, we think, well, first of all, humongous organization, and then we think insurance, right? Because that's kind of what you guys have got a name for. And when certainly I'm out talking to corporates with that sort of smaller companies, the SMEs or the startups, insurance is always kind of where everybody points to. Well, we've got insurance, so we're all okay. And there's this kind of thing that stuff happens in the background, but really nobody knows what that stuff is. So it's really helpful to have you here because obviously you see it from that side. But obviously, what AXA are also then doing is providing that service as well. From so when stuff does happen, be it minor or major, and that is both from a medical side and a security side. You're actually supporting them throughout that whole process. So, do you guys, I guess because you've kind of got that whole viewpoint, do you guys use that when you're actually sort of talking to corporates? Because the reason I'm asking this is there does seem to always be a blocker when we're talking to corporates about travel risk management, there's always this, like I said, it's either my travel management company deals with it or my insurance company deals with it. Without us really getting into the inside as to what that actually means, right? It's not just calling a telephone number and then off we go. You're the stuff that happens behind that. So how do you approach that with corporates and sort of talk that through so that they understand there's a lot more to it than just I've got insurance? Does that make sense?
Yeah, again, it's a very well known within our industry misconception by corporates, and we get it all the time. That when we're speaking to them, letting them know exactly what we do, because again, another misconception is that AXA is insurance. We aren't just insurance. There's a whole other aspect to the organisation, including investment and so on and so on and so on. Even environmental, and that we have a whole entity now studying climate and environment. Again, which is helping us contribute towards our risk management for our
Yeah.
corporate clients. But yeah, it's a lot of the time we all get this question put to us as to why do I need this, and that because we have insurance, and ultimately at the end of the day, insurance doesn't pay for everything, and also it doesn't save lives. It will literally pay for something after something has happened, and that you need that support network, that safety net there. So when something does happen, you have some form of activation that you can call upon to give you that support to get you through that incident, and then to look at then, okay, let's submit an insurance claim and then see if we can get payment back and that for that, or if insurance has covered the cost of the whatever it was that I needed the support for. But ultimately, at the end of the day, insurance isn't going to save your life. It isn't going to pack your bag. It isn't going to put you on an aircraft and move you out of a country on its own. Will only pay for it.
And arguably not necessarily pay for it either. So
Yes,
sometimes you're on your own sorting out that
and
stuff, aren't you? So
and that, but again, I mean, for ourselves, and that with the product that we have, and that there is an insurance product in there, so we don't, nothing will happen, and that if the insurance isn't going to pay for it, and we make sure that we have a robust insurance product in place. Again, it's something key for the corporate clients that we meet with, is to make sure that they do have the correct insurance product in place, and that so that they, if something does happen, they know it will be taken care of in terms of costs, and that because the cost of moving people during a major event or a crisis of some sort can be costly. It can be very easy, can be very cheap, just a case of putting somebody on a bus and moving them over a border. But it can be, and that a long-term event in terms of we have to get them to take a shelter in place for a period of time, and then we have to activate a number of people, a number of forms of transportation, sometimes private aircraft. So it can become excessively costly, and that when it comes to actually moving people to a safe environment.
completely, I completely understand. And obviously, as part of your remit, when you sort of say, it's my responsibility to ensure we've got the ability to do that, you're talking about obviously the technology side, but you're also talking about all of your contacts across the world to be able to kind of go in either for a medical reason or for a security reason if you're doing evacuations or anything else that you might be doing. So this is all of those things that are under your remit to look after.
Yeah, so again, I mean, our global network is very important for us, and yeah, Elia, who is a colleague of mine working on the health side, and he will be constantly, and it is constantly looking at the medical network, ensuring that the medical network is robust enough to support our clients for every eventuality. In pretty much every location, and he needs to know that if somebody falls sick in this city, where they need to go to for this type of and medical treatment. And again, it's exactly the same for the security aspect on my side, ensuring that we have the right people in the right places, and that to support our corporate clients, ones that we know where they have locations. So we build a network that we know and that needs to be close by to an organization, but we also have to have a fairly loose network as well that have capabilities and that more on regional remits, and they can be called upon at any given time for specific types of events to support us. Ultimately, we would like to have an AXA person sat in every city and every town waiting for something to happen, but obviously it's just not cost effective, and that we can't operate in that way. But in terms of the network, it's essential that we have a in-depth network. And then when I say in-depth, if somebody is available, we need to know that there is at least another 2 or 3 levels we can call upon to ensure somebody is there that can support and that our clients in their time of need. But as I say, most of the time, with our travel risk management tool, we're trying to be proactive. So it allows us to be able to monitor what is potentially happening, or could potentially happen, and that so that we can put things in place to prevent and that, or try to mitigate that risk and that to that person before things happen. So if we can see something's going to be happening in a couple of days' time, we advise people not to go there, to go here, to move there, not to travel, etc. Hopefully mitigating that risk. But obviously, we can't predict everything. Things do happen, and we're not aware that they're going to happen, such as natural disasters. So we have to be reactionary as well. So again, it comes down to our network, making sure the network is prepared and ready for these types of events, so that again we can call upon them and they're able to react in that the same way we have to support our clients.
Completely, because absolutely, this is the thing. It's not just a nice to have, is it? When you're actually calling upon them, it's because you need them, and that could be
Mm,
a life or death situation. That could be one individual, but it could be impacting a whole city. It could be impacting a whole kind of region as well. So it's essential that those relationships are there. And I'm sure, well, I know because I know you, the due diligence piece on that and ensuring that that global network of reaching your standards is a massive part of what you do. So just with that, with ISO 31030 obviously making an appearance a couple of years ago, has that changed your, not your conversation, but has that sort of changed the interest? Has that made conversations easier with people? Has it not really made any difference at all? How are you finding that?
I'd say again, for ourselves in the industry, it's a great tool or great subject matter that's come into place because people have a standard to work to now. Yeah, it'd be great, even better, I feel, once a certification is actually in place, then people actually have something to work to show that they are at that level. Because at the moment, it's just a standard for people to try to conform to, but nobody really there to assess it to make sure they've done it correctly. And people tend to do the tick in the box. Have you got this? Yes, I haven't really at the moment, but I'll come back to it later, and still tick the box. And that so people still haven't met the standards, and that we find it, and that as we meet different clients or different prospects, they still haven't quite met that standard that is really there, and we're there hopefully to help them move into that little slot, so then they can turn around and say, yes, we have this now. But again, it's something that is on our shoulders as well. We have to try to make sure that we're reaching and achieving that standard as well, so that whatever services we're doing are meeting the standard. And it comes down to, say, the network, as I mentioned before, making sure that they try to achieve and attain that standard. The difficulty is that in some of the countries where we form partnerships and allegiances, is really don't have any form of accreditation, certification, standards that they follow, and trying to get them to come up to the level of what we're wanting is extremely difficult. Yet they are experts in their region or their country, and that because they've been living there, they've been raised in that environment, and that where we may need assistance. So they're still the point to go to, and that because of their local, regional, geographical, and language capabilities, and because of their knowledge in terms of the political situation, etc., etc. So again, in some of these far out reach, and that old Russian states and so on, and that we can find some very good people, and that, but in terms of their organization meeting some of the ISO type standards, it's still a difficult call to come upon. And that, however, we're still working on it, and I believe in time that as they will start to form their standards, and they will start to again move up to the levels that we're trying to request and accept from them.
And ultimately, you've got your own stuff in place, so you know if they're conforming to what you need them to do. Obviously, if a standard doesn't kind of exist or it's not something that happens in the country, you've got to kind of, we've all got to grow together, haven't we? And I think this
Mm,
is the key thing with this particular standard and this whole piece around travel risk management as this evolves, is that every single piece of the puzzle that's involved is at a different level of understanding on this. And you can take that to a regional level, you can take that to a country level, you can take that globally, and then you can take that across all the different silos across travel and security and risk management. And you can bring that back into the corporations across their different silos. And everybody is at a different place. So this whole thing kind of has to evolve. And as you know, it's our shared belief that in about a decade, this will just be commonplace, right? We won't be having this podcast anymore because everyone will just do it. But that will only come with certification, but that only comes with the industry all coming together and moving forward. So let's park that for a second. Let's take you back down memory lane And let's have a little chat about how what's your why? What is it that makes you do this, Shaun?
That's a lot of years to go back.
I
Uh,
know. Go
uh,
on. We've got
okay,
the
well, I
time.
mean, I initially fell into this type of role, and that because I was in the military, and within the military, and that some of the missions and so on, organizing the military, the mission planning, and that was ultimately military terminology of crisis management. And when I left the military, I realized that what I was doing on a daily basis in the military was actually very acceptable in the civilian world, but obviously terminology had to be changed for it to be understood. So I worked on uh, crisis management planning and translated from military terminology to civilian terminology what it was I used to do, and it worked very well. And I fell into crisis management roles, and from there, while managing crisis management type scenarios and roles for various different corporates and organizations, I then met an assistance company based in Malaysia, or based out of Malaysia, and that because I was living in Asia at this time, and they were looking for a security related person to come in to manage the crisis management, travel risk management aspects, so they could bundle it with their medical assistance services, and that because it seemed to be the way that organizations were going, such as International SOS and so on, that they were offering the combined services of security and medical together. Um, so my crisis management then transitioned into assistance, and then within the assistance role, and that came with the travel risk management aspect. As such, that was there for the crisis management side of it, but it was just a small portion. It was a case of I helped organizations build crisis plans, help them test it, and so on. And then within that building of the crisis plan, there was a small element of travel risk management that I assigned to a travel risk management team, who then built that, and it was connected to the crisis plan, and it would be activated at different times should it be required, depending on what the scenario was that was impacting that organization. So the travel risk management aspect came along on the back of assistance, which came along on the back of crisis management, and that so now I offer 24/7 crisis management environments to organizations, ensuring that they have good travel risk management before they travel and while they're traveling, and then offering them assistance in their time of need. So now it's encompassed all three aspects of what I've gradually worked my way through over the many years.
Many, many, many. Not at all. Not at all. So you are then, I think, the person to ask this question to, because there seems to be a lot of confusion out there and there's a lot of noise. And I think, let's be honest, all of this stuff is quite similar and there's a lot of overlap. And I think there's a lot of companies and parts of the industry and the end users that kind of want this whole thing to come together to make it a little easier to sort of digest and manage. And then you've kind of got die fast. No, it's this. You don't need that. It's crisis management, and that covers everything. Or it's this and it's that. So can we? I know this is a big thing to put on you, but obviously it's your opinion. But can you sort of define some of the differences as you've been involved in all of them? Can we look at perhaps what crisis management is versus assistance management, and then versus travel risk management itself? How do the things tie together? I know that's a big one, but I just want some definition here because I think people are really struggling. So many times I'm like, they hear them, well, we're doing a crisis management course. And yeah, that's great. But there is a whole other piece with this with travel as well. So travel risk management isn't just about high risk countries and high risk
Mm.
activities, is it? There's a whole other piece to it. So what are your opinions on all of this, if I could be so bold?
Okay, how long have we got? Um,
Oh, we've got about 15, so you're all good.
so yeah, I mean, crisis management is ultimately building plans so that you can then work through a crisis, and that can be anything from you have a outage, and that which is also connected to the business continuity. And again, people get a little bit confused. So we got a good business continuity plan. I don't need the crisis plan, and crisis teams say we don't need the business continuity because we got the crisis plan, and that they are different, but they are very heavily interlinked. So it can be anything from say, and that you can't get access to the office because the doors are locked, and that there's a protest outside the door. That is a crisis for your organization because you're going into the office, and that, or it can be something where you've had 20 travelers have caught up in a political destabilization, being held hostage, whatever. So that the crisis planning is to allow you to be able to work through that crisis situation, and to have the correct members within the team that can make the correct decisions based on what their role is within that crisis team. And that, so again, those people within the team don't have to be, you don't have to have the CEO of a company as the head of the crisis team. Often it's better to have that person sat in the background who is a yes and no decision maker, and the crisis team manager is somebody else that can actually operate and manage people. And often, no offense to CEOs out there, they often aren't the best people managers. They're very good at business decisions, but in terms of people management, often aren't they different. And again, to have the 2IC within a crisis team is often that normally the CEO's PA is often the best person, because she's extremely he is extremely organized. Sorry to be sexist there, and actually is very organized in terms of that side of the management. So as I say, the crisis plan is predominantly there to allow you to work through that crisis to hopefully come out with a successful resolution at the end of it. The travel risk management portion is, and again, is heavily linked to duty of care, to be honest. And again, a lot of people that get confused with the duty of care and the travel risk management side of it. And an analogy that I was given not so long ago is, if you look at an aircraft, it has the safety equipment on board, and that you have the life jackets and the oxygen mask and so on. And that the duty of care is for the airline to provide you with the life jackets and the oxygen masks. The travel risk management side of it is how to use, and that when they stand up and do the demonstration and so they put this on and blow into this tube, blow the whistle, and so on. That's the travel risk management side. So they are very heavily interlinked again, but separate. The duty of care is often a legislative directive, and that from a country and government, and that driving people to make sure they have things in place to offer that safety net when they come to travel, etc., etc. But again, often many countries that I've worked in, especially across Asia, don't have legislation in place, so duty of care doesn't exist. So education is key in terms of educating these people to let them know what it is they need, to make sure they understand what they need to be doing for their people, to give them that safety net when they either come to work or step outside of the office to go elsewhere on business related tasks. So those two are heavily interlinked. Now, the travel risk management part of it is also linked into the crisis management plan, and then it would be activated at the time of a crisis, and then they would determine, okay, is this a traveller that is caught up, or an expatriate and so on, and caught up in this, and that if so, then what is required from the travel risk management team in terms of supporting this. Now, normally associated with the travel risk management side of it is you then have a travel risk management tool that is then subscribed to through a provider such as ourselves, Helix, Peregrine, etc., International SOS, and so on. So then and normally associated with that side of it is assistance and insurance. So then when with the crisis team then alert the travel risk management team and say, okay, this is what's happening, this is the crisis, you need to activate your team your team to support these people. They would then activate or press the red button that they have, or whatever the means is. Often it's the traveller who's pressing the red button on the app, but sometimes it's the travel risk management team being informed that you need to do this because we need to get these people out, or to look at how we're going to move these people. So they would then activate the travel risk management provider, who is often the assistance provider. And often that assistance provider is interlinked with insurance or encompassed with insurance, such as ourselves, and that then to look at then how is this going to be paid for. So all of them are separate. It would be nice to have them all in one bubble, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way, and that they do need to be separate, and that because not always is the travel risk management team required, not always is a crisis team required for a travel risk management related incident. The two need to converse and decide, okay, this is a crisis, it's going beyond, but includes you as well, or this isn't a crisis, this is just one person, we will monitor it, the travel risk management team can handle this via the travel risk management provider, and so on. So yes, all heavily interlinked, all driven by often, as I say, legislative government, and that such as duty of care, and that driving organizations and providers such as ourselves to make sure these things are in place.
That was honestly, that was fantastic. And this is the thing, it is all interlinked. And one of it, you can't kind of do one without the other. But depending on where you, I guess, come into this space, depends on then your viewpoint with it. And it's good obviously again to talk to you about it and to see all the different areas, because from where you sit, you've either experienced them all, or you're, working in an organization that has all of those different areas and can therefore see the difference. When you move that into corporate, it's not always so easy for them to see the difference because they don't necessarily have the resources in those roles. And I think it can just suddenly feel like, oh, here's another thing we've got to do. And oh my goodness, here's another thing. Whereas actually, if we can get the frameworks in place, all of them link in. And I think something that I just want to pick up on that you said just towards the end there was sometimes the crisis team doesn't need to be involved in a travel risk management thing because it can just be something a little bit more minor. So just I think we get really caught up in the sort of high risk, high countries, kidnap ransom, blah 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 stuff because well, I guess as much as it's horrible, it's a bit more interesting to sell and its stories and all that kind of stuff. Actually, the everyday stuff is the stuff that's affecting travelers, and that's kind of when travel risk management comes into its own, right? Because it's the pre-travel piece, the preparation, and then helping those travelers. So without kind of wanting to kind of get into all the different calls and stuff that you guys do, would it be fair to assume that the majority of your calls are minor
Oh yeah.
incidences affecting travelers? Do you want to talk through some of that sort of
I
stuff
mean,
so we can?
definitely, and again, a lot of the corporates we speak to, that they're, as you say, they're concerned. Our travelers are traveling to high-risk destinations. We need security escorts. We need armored vehicles. What are we going to do about this? And okay, we can advise you on that, and we can provide all this. But what about your travelers who's traveling to Berlin, and is arriving there after a 15-hour flight, and then he has to take a hire car? What about him? Because he's getting off the plane extremely tired, and he has to drive an hour in a country he hasn't been to before, on the wrong side of the road, and so on. And you're looking at more risk there probably than the person who's traveling to the high risk destination who has a security team protecting him while he's there, and for that duration
Exactly.
of that trip. So a lot of people get, as I say, caught up in the big risks and forget the smaller ones. Such as the quality of hotel they're staying at, and the medical facilities that are nearby or not nearby, and so on. So we try to look at the full picture for an organization as to when they tell us, because again we try to build a picture as to where they travel or where they have people based, and that so then we can say, okay, this is and the risks that we would see clearly now associated with your destinations and your overseas investments, etc. And that and then but this is what you need to be doing, because what you have at the moment is just an insurance product, or at the moment you don't have anything, or you have a crisis plan but it's just a book that isn't really looked at or tested. And as I tell people, a crisis plan in a folder is only good for holding the door open in the event of a crisis, unless it's actually been reviewed and tested, and is regularly maintained, because it's one of these articles that is never finished. It's like a never-ending novel, and that it constantly needs updating. And the same, exactly the same with the travel risk management plan and team and policy, etc., etc. Ultimately, end of the day, and as I say, and like you said, people get caught up in the big
Mhm.
picture
Yeah,
rather than the smaller one. And as I say, that we the majority of calls we get are people just asking advice, and often they haven't even set foot on the plane yet, and that
that's
it's
interesting. So
and
a lot of
and
it is coming through pre for
coming
you.
through pre and that's purely because of the what we're feeding towards them. As soon as they're booking a trip, they're having information pushed at them, and sometimes they're still not sure, and they still have the element of doubt as to whether they should be traveling or not, or what they should or shouldn't be doing when they get there. So it's more advisory before they travel. We sometimes get it while they're traveling.
Mhm.
It's I can't say it never happens, but in terms of big cases such as mass evacuations from dangerous areas after the say tsunamis and so on, natural disasters, um, military invasions such as Ukraine and so on, that they happen, but they are few and far between. And as I say, and we do have clients pretty much with people all over the world. So, and when things do happen, it's often only one person that's actually impacted in terms of our remit. And that,
Yeah.
so it's so we're not having to send in the troops really to try and get masses of people out. We don't have the difficulty in terms of trying to get mass transportation to get people out. And occasionally we do have, say, mass evacuations, both medical and security, but they are very few and far between. But we have to be prepared and ready for it. So,
Absolutely,
mm,
well, absolutely, without a doubt, which of course is what then comes into the sort of the training and the immersion and the heat training and all that kind of stuff that comes as second nature to I think anyone working within security organizations or those companies that sort of are going to high risk
mm,
countries. But again, this is something we can really kind of bring out to all organizations to really think about how they're bringing this to life for their staff, because
mhm,
ultimately you're not just going to keep them more secure and healthier when they're working. It's going to bring into their leisure lives as well,
mm,
right? So it's just better for everybody kind of having this vigilance. Um but I think the thing that, yeah, for me, one of the big differentiators in this piece is that travel risk management is just much wider than this kind of high risk, high activity
mm,
country thing that we're and they're sort of sending in the troops. It could literally be someone falling ill on a trip. It could be um somebody being mugged as one person
mm.
on their own. Again, that feels like it's a higher risk, but that could as easily happen in London as it could
And
in Mexico City.
yeah, I say another thing we find as well is that some companies or organizations are more risk adverse than others. And
Hmm.
because they are working in extreme risk environments all the time. So for them to have a small fire or the odd shooting is actually normal. It's their day-to-day activities. Yet, if I had another client who traveled to an area and there was one shot fired, it would be a major incident. And that
Of
so
course.
we have to allow the client to dictate slightly in terms of and that what is acceptable to them. And that at the end of the day, as I say, we're there as a support network for them. We want their safety is our number one objective, and that so we will always be coming to them saying, okay, there has been this incident. This is our advice at this time, and whether they take it or leave it is their decision at the end of the day. And we give them a period of time where we offer them evacuation should they want to take it, and so on, based on the incident. And that, but as I say, we do have to conform somewhat to what the client actually wants. We can advise them and given our experience and knowledge and so on. But yeah, so but I say that some are much more risk averse than others.
No, agreed, and you see this again and again, isn't it? And I think, and that's the whole art of this 31,000, isn't it? That's the whole argument as to whether or not it can be certifiable or
Mm,
not, because arguably it's up to the company to decide their own risk. So that's kind of one of the anti-arguments for sort of making it certifiable. I sit in a slightly different place where I still think that's auditable, so there's something there, but it's just trying to kind of get this knowledge there for everybody to understand that there is a lot more to this than just that sort of high risk countries. And that's sort of, I think, what's been really helpful with having you here today is this nod we do to sort of global assistance, global insurance, and global travel support. Actually, we need to get under the skin of that a little bit more. And it is down to the companies, going back to what you said right at the beginning, to understand, well, what is it that you do? Where do you go?
mm.
And then from there, we ascertain the risks. And from there, we ascertain how their tolerance is. And from there, we then put the stuff around it. There seems to be a real thing to kind of just go to the solution and sort of do this cover all, which actually maybe worked a few years ago, but the reality is it's not necessarily going to work for your company unless you've put your framework in and you understand. And as a company, you make some decisions around your risk tolerances, which you guys can advise on, but you can't tell them how to do that.
I mean,
Right?
so some key things that have driven the travel risk management business that we've seen are, and that one is technology. And that everybody has a smartphone now. When something happens, everybody is there, and the first thing people do now, instead of helping people, is they film it. And within seconds, it's on social media.
Yeah.
Within minutes, it's on local news. Within a few minutes later, it's on international news. So people are getting a blow by blow account of what is happening, and people realize now that something can happen anywhere, and that you
Yeah.
don't need to be in a high risk environment to have a terrorist attack anymore. And that you don't need to be. in an area that doesn't have natural disasters to actually be caught up in a natural disaster. And that so people have become much more aware in terms of and that risks and that could happen and could impact them as they travel. So we've had quite a lot of SMEs coming that didn't really look at this previously.
Mm.
They said, well, I've only got 2 or 3 people traveling. Why on earth do I need a full travel risk management program and that to look after my people? They only travel to Paris twice a year and so on. Why do I need anything? So it's become much more pertinent for people such as that because they've realized that something can happen pretty much anywhere. And again, the pandemic was another key driver in terms of travel risk management. People realized that they had people traveling, but they didn't know where they were, how to
Mm.
communicate with them, how to get them back home because they became trapped because borders got closed. So people were left lost and not knowing who to speak to, how to get home, who they could call upon, and that for that assistance portion. So now, and that what we do is become much more, as I say, pertinent. People are much more aware of these kinds of services. People are much more aware that they need these kinds of services, and that because unfortunately some tragic events have driven us this way, but and that hopefully this will be a plus out of the negative of the things that have happened.
Agreed, and I think it's just so what you're saying just rings so true with kind of all the different people that I speak to because ultimately it's the travelers that are asking for this. This is where this is being driven from because if they're stuck and stranded, and well, they'll turn to whoever they've got in place. So that could be the insurance company, that could be the assistance company, that could be the travel agent. So suddenly you've got all of these different sectors saying, oh, everyone's asking for this additional piece of advice. Everybody kind of wants this. So that's what's going to drive this forward. It doesn't therefore actually ultimately matter how you choose certain providers to help you run your program.
Mm.
What makes sense what's important in that is that you understand it and you're able to then explain that to your travelers, so when stuff does happen they know instantly what to do, who to call, and they're not calling a TMC when actually they should be calling their insurance company and all that stuff. There's a flow. So you've given us lots of good tips and you've given us lots of advice, but what anyone coming into this sort of space, what would be, I don't know whether perhaps they haven't really looked at this from a travel risk management space yet. They kind of focus maybe on crisis management. What are your tips as to how people get started?
How to get started in this? I mean, as I say, one
Never
of the
leave once you're
yeah,
in.
one of the quotes that's always driven me in this is I think it was some Greek philosopher said, "Always expect the unexpected," and that's what drives me to look as to what can be done next, what haven't we thought of, what what is not happening that actually could happen, and that because people are normally looking at what's happening, and that rather what is not happening at the moment, so people tend to forget it. So then, so as I say, and it comes from crisis management training, really, is that you need to try and prepare for as much as you can, and that you can't prepare for everything, and that but you need to try and prepare for it as much as you can, and that as I say that a lot of people as well think that travel risk management is corporates only. It's not, and that, there is a huge leisure travel market out there, and all travelers traveling on leisure and that don't want to know about travel risk management because it's scary. They don't want to know that things could go wrong, and that but then they certainly want the support there when things do go wrong, and they start waving their arms away. Why aren't you rescuing me? Why aren't you giving me advice? Why didn't you tell me about this? So it's something we're actively looking at as to how we can support the leisure market. But again, if somebody wanting to get into the travel risk management industry, it's as I say, you just need to look beyond what is obviously in front of your face, and that need to look past that, and then look at the other smaller things that are beyond that, and what haven't you thought of. Think about if you're traveling, what it is that you would want if something went wrong. I say that many years ago when I was a young soldier, I was in Kenya, staying in a ramshackle hotel. I got a knock at the door. An American girl, her sister wasn't breathing. Went down, tried to resuscitate her. She didn't survive, unfortunately. And it was the first time ever, as a young person, I'd actually thought, what does this person do now? and she didn't know who to call, what to do. It was before the days of mobile phones, showing how old I am there. Um, who who can support her? So that, and that always makes me think back, and that, as to what should have happened, what should have been there to support her, and her sister that passed away. Um, so as I say, for me, and that I always try and think about, okay, if that's me traveling, what it is, what would I want if I got sick? That what would happen, and who would be contacted? How would I be looked after? Who would look after me? Who would tell my parents? Who would tell my wife and my children, etc.? What would happen to them? And that would they be able to travel to come and see me? If they can't, how could they contact me? That if my flight is cancelled and they can't get me on a flight because of my injury, how and so I try and look at what it is that I would need in the event of whatever. And as I say, and the biggest thing is to try and look past what is clearly in front of your face at the moment, because there's a whole bunch of other things way beyond that that often are forgotten. And again, that's something, and my advice in terms of for anybody who wants to get into TRM is to try and look at things that beyond what is in front of you. Try and prepare for or expect the unexpected, as I say.
Thank you so much. I think it's just beautifully kind of brought together that what is something I always try and bring together on these podcasts is that you don't have to be an expert in security in order to sort of have something to say in this space, because that's the whole point. We're trying to bring together all of these different conversations, and a phrase I often use is that anything can happen to a traveler can happen when they're traveling. So that brings into your conversations around DE&I. It brings into conversations around sustainability. It brings into conversations around your mental health and your QHSE and all of that kind of stuff. This is so much more than high risk, high crisis situations. And that's what I kind of want to bring forward. So, from my perspective, finding a niche, I get the travel industry. I understand it. I've been working with it for all these years, and I know, love God love them, they're not ready for this. They're not there. They don't have an understanding yet. There's some companies out there that are doing great, but actually they're heavily reliant on the security companies and the risk management companies to help them. So there has to be this sort of evolution that happens. So for me, that's my space that I wanted to kind of get into and help. And at the same time help the corporates, because there's this gap. And everybody's got their own way of finding this. And hopefully, obviously, on this podcast, we have lots of different guests showing all of those different things, so that if you do have an interest in any of this stuff, there is a way into this, and there is a way into risk management. So, Shaun, thank you so much. I need to let you all know this podcast has not been without technical issues for us to bring you this today. So it's been totally worth it. And I'm just really, really glad that we've been able to do it. Thank you. Any final words before we say goodbye? Or you can just say goodbye.
I can just say goodbye. I mean, there's a whole host of other things I'd still like to talk about, but there's obviously running out of time. And
I'm
that,
gonna bring you back.
yeah, one of the things corporates as well is the whole other environment that they have to think about now is like the hybrid worker, the digital nomad, as well as the expatriate and so on, which again opens up a whole host of other risks as well. So this is something else that we've had to look at extensively as well, and that's put things in place to support these kinds of workers as well now, which is a new
Oh.
aspect for a lot of bit organizations now.
And again, companies they're not sure where this all sits. So they have to,
Mm,
people sort of extending their trips and all of this. Where does that sit? Where's the,
exactly,
where
pleasure and
who's
all of this. Yeah.
responsible? Exactly. So, or workations, as I was told recently, I was like, oh, that's a different term for it. So we need a part two, which we will do. But actually, the other thing I think will be really cool is we'll bring you into one of our Meet the Mentors, because you are a mentor of the TRA, and we'll be able to have some of these conversations in some of our webinars, because we have to have these conversations to explain what's going on, to then make people kind of think, oh yeah, we need to do that within our business. So watch this space. There'll be a lot more of Shaun, and you can get loads more tips from him as well. Thank you so much. You've been listening to Bex Deadman, also known as Travel Risk Bex, on Talking TRM, the podcast dedicated to travel risk management. We'll see you in a couple of weeks, and in the meantime, take care.